Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, September 10th, 2013. Getting into the thick of it out here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. And before we get into Syria and all the stuff that's going on, I was listening to Phyllis Schlafly's talk about Common Core education, and it relates to a story we just put up at whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently, the Glendale School District in California, I used to live very near there. Actually, Claire was living in Glendale when I met her. Apparently, they are paying a private company called GeoListening $40,000 a year to monitor the social media traffic of their students 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's all for the safety of the children. They're looking for cyberbullying, and they're getting the kids used to being under total surveillance. And we know our schools don't have money for good teachers. They don't have money for school supplies. In fact, our local bank down here at the bottom of the hill always has a box out. If you have any leftover office supplies, throw them in there, because the schools don't have paper, they don't have pencils, they don't have any of that stuff. When I got out of the film and TV business, when I was kicked out of the film and TV business for a second time, I took all the little branded pens for our company and just threw them in the box. But they've got money to hire companies to spy on your children in their private activities. Now, I understand that the school wants to keep an eye on the students while they are at school, but I'm very alarmed at this trend of schools spying on kids in their homes. Remember that scandal we had about a year ago, where the school was supplying laptops that had built-in cameras that could be turned on remotely by the school officials to spy on kids in their bedroom at home, possibly undressed, possibly while doing things that young kids do while undressed. Is this really the nation you want to leave to your children to have to live in? It's just completely out of control, this whole surveillance state. If I were in a school, if I were lucky enough to have kids, which I'm not, biggest disappointment in my life. If I had kids and they were in school and I found out the school was spying on them outside of school hours and off school grounds, I'd yank my kid and I'd homeschool. Or I would find some way to send him to private school. But you parents ought to be furious. This has nothing to do with the safety of the children. This is all about spying on them constantly, the same way the NSA and PRISM spies on you. It is the hallmark of a government that is absolutely terrified out of their minds that the American people are waking up to the enormity of the fraud, lies, and scams with which we have been ruled for the last 100 years, if not more. All right, now getting on to Syria, as you're probably aware, John Kerry made a major political misstep talking about calling off the attack on Syria if Assad would surrender his chemical weapons. And there's still some confusion over whether Kerry came up with it first or Lavrov came up with it, and Kerry said, yeah, it'd be a good idea. But it was an off-the-cuff remark. Wasn't official policy, and Russia said, yeah, we'll go for that, and so did Syria. Syria said, sure, we're not using these things, go ahead and take them. We don't care. And all of a sudden, the rush to war hit a major, major pothole, and the war hawks are busy with their jacks and shovels and stuff, trying to get the war wagon out of that big old pothole they just ran it into. And they are trying. This is not over. Don't for a second think it's not over. But it has stumbled very badly. At this time, both houses of Congress are unable to pass a war resolution. And I want to issue a big thank you and pat on the back to everybody listening to this program. All you Rivero's Rangers who answered the call to keyboard and flooded Capitol Hill with phone calls, faxes, and emails saying no. Not just no, heck no, darn no. Absolutely not. They can't get the votes in the Senate, as it turns out, and they're not even close in the House of Representatives. So it looks like the congressional vote is at least delayed until they're absolutely assured AIPAC has bought enough votes to pass it, and I'm sure that's what they're thinking right now. But it's showing up as a major setback for Obama and the war agenda, but it is only temporary. Of course, John McCain is out there screaming that John Kerry was unbelievably unhelpful. Darn it, you know, we got to get this war going because we got to have the war because the war is good. And so McCain is throwing a tantrum. By the way, there's a little side story that we have on whatreallyhappened.com. Apparently McCain got caught accepting some bribes from the Rothschild family, which of course is very much tied in with all of this global private central banking situation here. And everybody's trying to figure out a way to somehow get out of this situation that Russia and Syria have crafted. Over in Israel, Shimon Peres is saying, oh, the Syrians can't be trusted. We can't trust them. Hey, any deal you make with them, that's going to go bad. Which is a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black when you look at Israel's track record of keeping their promises to anybody. So Obama is trying to spin this as a moral victory. He's calling it a breakthrough. Pelosi's out there saying, yes, this is a moral victory for Obama, but that's for public consumption because this was never about the chemical weapons, just like Iraq was never about nuclear weapons. They're just trying to figure out some way to go on looking good, like they're still in control and making the key shots. Reid has canceled tomorrow's scheduled vote in the Senate on military action. Now, the headline says cancel, but it's actually a delay. They can bring it back to the floor the instant they think they have enough votes to get it through. It's one of the ways Congress operates there. But the reality is, in terms of public perception, and certainly global perception, Obama and the War Party just got their rear ends horsewhipped with a knotted plow line. So in true political fashion, they're up to saying, oh, this is a victory, really, and they're scurrying back into their dark holes where they will scheme some more to try and get this war that they want. Now, the reality, as I said before, this war on Syria was never about chemical weapons, just as Iraq was never about nuclear weapons. AIPAC is still flooding their lobbyists into the U.S. Congress to push for U.S. war with somebody. And I understand that at the end of the month, Netanyahu is going to go out on the speaking trail again, putting the focus back on Iran. We've got to go to war against Iran. You've got to kill Iran. They're months away from a nuclear weapon. And, of course, Israel's been screaming that Iran is months away from a nuclear weapon since back in 1985. Remember, Israel also claimed Iraq had nuclear weapons, just as Israel claimed to have evidence that Assad gassed his own people. Remember, by way of deception. So it's delayed. They're going to wait until they have enough votes to pass it, or they're relying on some kind of a massive false flag that will anger Americans into calling up Congress and say, yes, we've changed our minds, go ahead and kill those gosh darn Arab, Muslim, Syrian, terrorist, whatever. Now, Obama, of course, is coming up on his speech at 9 p.m. Eastern Time tonight. That's 3 in the afternoon here. We will be listening to it. And if he goes the route of saying this is a moral victory for peace and everything, then we'll know that there's a pause in the war. But if he goes back to pushing that whole lie about Syria gassing their own people, adding insult to injury, because we know it's just a complete fiction, then obviously the war is on. They're just looking for a new sales pitch. Alrighty, we're coming up on a break here. I know we got a caller waiting on the line. I got a few more comments about Syria that are coming on there. But before we hit the commercial break, I'm seeing places in the corporate media bemoaning Obama's failure to persuade the American people to go to war. But you know something? That's not his job. It's not in the Constitution for him to persuade America to do anything. The people tell Congress what to do, Congress tells the President what to do, and he executes that. That's why it's called the executive branch, and that's the way the government is supposed to work. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to take a phone call here. Joel in Canada. Aloha, Joel. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to point out that even if Obama comes from a position of, oh, this is a grand step for peace, that doesn't necessarily mean he's capitulated to the demands of the people. He could be putting up a blinder simply to make everyone think that he's capitulating, think that he's in a weak position, that he's a peaceful man. And then when the false flag happens, the people will be angered on his behalf, as opposed to opposing him in starting the war.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. They're trying to posture like they're going along with this deal, but we're hearing it from all these people in Israel's government and the war hawks in the U.S. government. They're trying to find some way around this, and I am fully expecting that Obama's speech tonight is going to be an attempt to resell this lie that Assad gassed his own people, and they were out there making allusions to Hitler used gas and so forth. So did the United States. The United States used chemical weapons against civilians in Vietnam and still won't compensate them. And you're absolutely right. You know, their next step is going to be some kind of a false flag, and I think what that's going to be is they're floating a new resolution to go up to the United Nations, where they're going to go up to the Security Council and say, we agree with Russia and Syria's plan to take international control of Syria's chemical weapons, but we reserve the right to have U.S. monitors in there. And by the way, as a precondition for this UN resolution, the UN has to sign off on the claim that Assad gassed his own people, and that's a non-starter. China and Russia will veto on that point because they simply have not made the case that Assad did it. The evidence is overwhelming. The hired mercenaries did it. Even the hired mercenaries are saying that. And the White House is going to try and get the United Nations to rubber stamp their official story, which will only discredit the United Nations all that much more. But they're desperate to get this war going.
But they are in a stronger position if they come off looking like the benevolent ones. If they go along with every demand for now, as soon as their false flag comes, right before the 45-day deadline for Syria to turn over their chemical weapons, then they can point it to Syria saying, look, they didn't want the deadline and they just bought time until they could get their act together so that they could bomb South Carolina, let's say. I mean, we already know that these plans are in place and there's a nuke
You're absolutely right. But again, most Americans now are very skeptical of the U.S. government. They know it is lying about virtually everything. And here's the point. Okay, if Syria turns over its chemical weapons to international controls and there's a new chemical weapon attack, the obvious common sense conclusion will be it was the hired mercenaries who the UN has had evidence they have chemical weapons going back to last May at least. Of course, we know the U.S. government will say, aha, Assad kept chemical weapons and used them, but why would he do that? Okay? Why would Assad carry out any...
Turn them over. The false flag will come first.
Well, you could, again, even if the chemical weapon attack comes before he turns over his weapons. John Kerry is saying it's a 1-week deadline, not 45 days. But even if a false flag chemical weapon attack happens, everybody's going to say, why would Assad do that? Knowing it opens the door to U.S. invasion. He's not going to use chemical weapons. The only people with anything to gain from using chemical weapons is the U.S. government and Israel and the hired mercenaries. And everybody knows that now. That's why Congress was getting, we heard in one case it was like only 4 out of 1,000 calls favored the war in Syria. The issue here, of course, is the credibility of the U.S. government, which is gone, the credibility of Israel, which is gone, the credibility of the corporate media, which is now gone. The American people are looking for reasons not to trust the official story, and when they stop and think about what they're being told, they realize it's just completely bogus. That's why they've hit this brick wall trying to get into Syria.
To this, even more every day, and get them to see the full extent. But at the same time, we can't allow ourselves a moment's doubt that everything they do is planned. They are not at a setback. This is a planned step to make them look like they're the benevolent ones.
That I disagree
giving them a chance at peace.
That I disagree with. I think Lavrov and Assad set a big bear trap and Kerry stepped into it. Because they were well on their way to having AIPAC arm twist the House of Representatives to support the war resolution. They were already laying the groundwork to say it's legal for Obama to carry out an attack on Syria even without Congress. They were ready to go. this deal that Syria has agreed to. Kerry went along with the idea because he didn't think Assad would agree to it. And Assad, snookered him in. They just lured him in. So it's a setback, it's a pause, but I do agree with you that, yes, they're still out there trying to find some way to start this war, and basically a false flag is about the only major card they've got left to play, which is why we're going to talk about it, because the more we talk about it and the more Americans are waiting for a false flag in Syria, the less likely the official cover story will be believed. Okay?
Thanks for letting me talk.
All right, Joel, we're going to let you go here and switch over to Dee in Minnesota. Aloha, Dee. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I'm back. This Syria thing, I sure hope Assad has signed a mutual defense treaty with Russia. If not, he's screwed.
Well, he has a mutual defense treaty with Iran, and Russia and China have both already indicated that when the U.S. attacks Syria, their plan is to pour weapons and supplies into the other side and turn Syria into the new Vietnam and wear the United States down in a war of attrition, which Russia has the resources to do because they've got a booming economy and the United States does not. The United States will lose a war of attrition, just like they lost in Vietnam.
The reason I say this is because we already have a track record, a history of leaders who gave up their chemical weapons and nuclear weapons voluntarily.
And then they get attacked.
Look at what happened to Gaddafi and Saddam. Where was Russia? Nowhere to be seen.
Russia didn't have as strong a strategic interest in Libya. I think Russia was sort of doing the Neville Chamberlain thing. All right, we'll let the Nazis take these few countries, but at the point where it's obvious that this process is not going to stop of its own volition, now they've drawn the line in the sand.
I'm hoping that you're right, but we've just seen too much of what happens to people. I mean, that's where who the U.S. government goes and attacks. We've seen it over and over and over again. People that cannot defend themselves.
That's
now,
right.
If they're going to attack, they'll wait until he's disarmed and then do it.
Basically, the war for Syria is on, and the reasons, again, are purely financial. And when I come back from this next commercial break and the next phone call, I'm going to go into that. Dee, if you don't have anything else, we're going to let you go, and we're going to start with Scott in Virginia and take him through the commercial break. Scott, are you there? Scott, I guess you're not there.
Hi, Mike.
Oh, there you are.
Yes. Can you? Hey, Mike. Listen, I was just listening to the call prior to the one that you just took, and I have to tell you, that lady really had some fantastic comments, because when I first heard that Assad was in talks to give up his weapons of mass destruction, his chemical weapons, I thought, what a brilliant move. But after listening to her, I can see that the ground is being set. If we end up putting inspectors on the ground in Syria, they're going to tell us, oh, well, he didn't turn over all of them, or they're missing, or we're finding out about human rights violations.
Yeah, that's what they're getting ready to do.
Movements of Syrian army.
That's what they're getting ready to do. Now, according to Debka, which I agree is a very questionable source, apparently Russian troops are already in control of the Syrian chemical weapons inside Syria. So that Russia's going to move very quickly to secure these things so they can say, we know where they are. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're still talking with Scott in Virginia. Scott, please continue.
Thank you, Mike. I had one other thing on the same subject about Syria. Have you heard reports that Syrian Navy had sunk a Israeli Dolphin-class submarine in the Mediterranean in May?
I had heard that, but there was no confirmation on it.
I've been trying to get confirmation. I've been referring to a website called Veterans Today by Gordon Dove, who on a side note, has your video about All Wars Are Bankers' War on the website.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, from what he says, and he's a former intelligence officer, I'm sure you know about him.
Yes.
He says that on May 2nd, the Syrian Navy sunk the Israeli sub, which was in Syrian waters, and 2 days later, on May 4th, the Israeli army, through artillery fire, sent a missile in, a mini-nuke, to hit Damascus, and apparently has a video of it showing the double flash and the lightning after the explosion. and it's not being reported about anywhere in the news. Now, we do know that the Russian Navy sent a salvage ship into the Mediterranean for the first time in decades. They've been in the Mediterranean, and apparently they're salvaging the downed Israeli sub. The Israelis can't do it because they're not even supposed to be in those waters.
Yeah, but we know they are, because a week ago today they launched a couple of missiles towards Syria, apparently from submarines, because they flew close enough to the U.S. fleet for the U.S. fleet to shoot them down.
But it's funny how if this is true, it's funny how neither side's talking about it. I can understand why Syria wouldn't talk about it, because if Assad acknowledges a nuclear blast to all of his people in Syria, some of them are going to want to capitulate, because Assad doesn't have any nuclear weapons that we know of.
Well, not capitulate, they'd want a retaliation. That's the problem. Assad is trying not to allow himself to be provoked by Israel's constant attacks, and that's something a lot of people need to remember. Israel has been bombing Syria on a regular basis for months now, hoping Syria will strike back. And Assad isn't going for it, and I'm sure there's a lot of pressure inside his government saying, come on, Israel keeps attacking us, when are we going to strike back? But Assad understands the instant they strike back, Israel's going to say to the United States, oh, please save us from the Syrian aggression, and they'll be off and running. So he's trying to keep things cool. Now, I have seen the video that you talk about. I'm not convinced it's a nuclear weapon, because any large explosion like a fuel air bomb will generate a mushroom cloud. The double flash of a nuclear weapon is so brief, it doesn't really register on video. You have to have special instrumentation to look at it. It's got a very characteristic curve, and I think what we're seeing are simply two detonations right next to each other. Because for a nuclear double flash, that first pulse is instantaneous like a xenon strobe, then the second one arcs up and decays much more slowly. And I didn't see that in the video. I could be wrong, but at this point, again, even though Israel is a nuclear power, had they used a nuclear weapon against Syria, well, then Syria could go over to where the attack took place, take radiological samples, and go to the United Nations saying, Israel has used nuclear weapons on our country, and that would be a political disaster for Israel. So Israel may have all these nuclear weapons, but there are major, major political liabilities for them to actually use one yet. So, again, I've heard all these reports, and there's a lot of stuff floating around, but I couldn't get any confirmation on any of it.
On a side note, I've read that Assad has used a very controversial program of offering amnesty to, and he was very unpopular within his country and his armed forces.
Yeah, but it worked. It worked. All those people, the Syrian people who were initially supporting the rebels, they've abandoned them and gone back over to Assad's side. And NATO is saying that right now polls inside Syria are showing 70% of the Syrian people are with Assad, 10% are with the hired mercenaries, and the remaining 20% are undecided.
Well, my point in bringing that up is to kind of put some context on why one of the reasons he's winning is because a lot of those rebel fighters, the Syrian ones, not the outsiders, they went over to Assad's side, but they didn't leave their units, which is destroying the rebel fighters' base. I mean, the rebel fighters can't infiltrate the Syrian army. They can't get somebody on the inside. But Assad has been able to get plenty of people in on their side by offering amnesty and saying, hey, stay with them and tell us where they're going, what they're doing, where they're getting their supplies. And that's why he's basically routed.
He's a very clever man. He's a very clever man. So is Putin. So is Lavrov.
I wish we had some cleverness on our side in our government right now. But that's all I had to say, Mike. Thank you very much.
I think the clever people have already been kicked out of Washington, D.C. because they keep asking embarrassing questions about what they're being told. All righty, let's switch over to Daniel in Louisiana. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, not much, Mike. Aloha.
Aloha.
Yeah. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, you're on the air.
All right, cool. I was gonna say a couple words about Syria. If Israel wants Syria so bad, why don't they just take it themselves? They got the IDF. They're right there next to Syria. Why does America have to cross that big ocean we call the Atlantic and go over there and fight their war for them. Why? Sure,
because that's what the Americans are for. I mean, the polls that are taking place in Israel is the Israelis are overwhelmingly in favor of a U.S. attack on Syria and a U.S. attack on Iran and a U.S. attack on everybody, and they're just, you know, opposed to risking any of those precious Israeli children in these wars. That's what Israel likes. Israel wants to have other people fight their wars, and they have a long history of using dirty tricks to make it happen. And again, I'll refer you back to Victor Ostrovsky's book, By Way of Deception, where he talks about how Israel smuggled a radio transmitter into Tripoli, Libya, and used it to send bogus radio messages that made it look like Gaddafi was ordering a campaign of global terror, which tricked Ronald Reagan into bombing Gaddafi. They went for him directly, they missed him, they killed his 5-year-old daughter. That's how Israel does these things. When Israel was attacking the USS Liberty, they were out there saying to the U.S., oh, Egypt's attacking your ship, Egypt's attacking your ship. And there was a nuclear-armed U.S. strike being prepared to go to Cairo when the crew of the Liberty finally got a radio message out saying, hey, these are Israelis shooting at us. And, of course, then the story changed. Oh, it was cloudy, it was foggy, we couldn't see, it was mistaken identity. We thought the Liberty was this Egyptian horse carrier because we all know that Egyptian horse carriers have these big dish antennas all over them, so we can understand the confusion. But this is the way Israel operates. And, again, it goes back to the motto of the Mossad, by way of deception thou shalt do war. And Israel loves to trick other people into fighting their battles for them because, hey, that's what those people are for, you know. And as long as they're able to buy the U.S. government to go along with that, then, yes, your kids are going to continue to die in wars on Israel's enemies. Now, Israel is not the only motive for the war agenda. It's one of many overlapping motives. Wars don't start for just one reason. What it is you get together a group of interests who, for their own reasons, support the war. Then you gin up an excuse to sell it to the people who have to fight that war, and you're off and running. Israel has their territorial ambitions. They want to smash political rivals in the region. The Federal Reserve obviously wants to continue to project Bretton Woods across the rest of the globe. The defense contractors just want to sell things that go bang. Certainly from the federal government's point of view, a new world war is going to distract everybody from the fact that the economic hardship we are suffering through was not the cause of the war, but Wall Street's Ponzi scheme banking and government corruption. So everybody going into this thing, they all have their own reasons for the war, but they all agree war will solve all their problems, hence the rush. Okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right, we're going to switch over to Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Do you think that Putin took any energy out of the American people by stepping into the situation at all? Do you feel that before he stepped in with his evidence, with his broadcast, do you feel that the American people were gaining momentum? And then when he stepped in, it took a little bit out of the American people.
No, I don't think so. The reaction I'm getting for looking at the social media is everybody's glad that he did it. But we understand that this push for war is not over. Putin has thrown a major roadblock in the way, but we already see clear signs our government is trying to figure out some way around it. So we understand we can't lose the momentum, that we have to keep calling members of Congress. We have to start calling the White House and just tell them, look, we know you're lying. Who do you think you're fooling? We're not that stupid.
My theory goes on to the idea that Putin, by doing so, he did maybe, I believe, take some energy out, but in the long run, by getting himself and his troops into Syria, he now can observe any false flag that may occur. And he has already exposed the false flag that has happened. Therefore, it would prevent a false flag from occurring in the future. So I believe he's playing a game that will give him even more exposure to the rest of the world.
Okay, we got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And boy, talking about scraping the bottom of the barrel for pro-war propaganda. They've got some guy on Fox News right now talking about the war in Syria and biblical prophecy, that this is all in accord with the end time, and we should go along with war in Syria because we'll blow up the world, and then Jesus is going to come down and invite us all up to the big house when it's all over there. All righty, now, let's see. I want to go back to what our last caller was talking about. False flag, and we know that's very much a risk, and certainly Russia is keeping an eye over Syria, to ward that off. A week ago today, when Israel fired those missiles at Syria, attempting to provoke a response, it was Russia that was tracking them and sending messages to Assad saying, don't fall for it, don't fall for it. It's not the Americans, it's the Israelis. They're trying to goad you. But we already know, and this is something that is not being covered at all in the corporate media, Israel has been bombing Syria on a regular basis for the last few months. And what Israel may simply decide to do, and they're openly talking about it in the Israeli media, is just start bombing Syria until Assad is forced to strike back. Then Israel will run off to the United States and say, Syria's attacking us, Syria's attacking us. Oh, well, we got to go help our friend in the Mideast. It could be just that overt here. Now, I believe our next caller is Jimmy in Texas. Jimmy, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you for taking my call.
So what's on your mind?
The Syria, it's like now they're going to waive the strike because now they're going to move out weapons. So
that's
all
the
this
theory.
was like just a big scam, or?
Well, no, the scam was screaming that Assad gassed his own people as an excuse to go to war. And with Russia and Syria saying, yeah, Assad is going to give up his chemical weapons because he's not actually using them. It's not really a lot for Assad to give away in order to, basically try and hold off the U.S. invasion, because Assad and Lavrov and Putin understand global opinion is very much against the United States government at this moment. And so it's a pothole. The U.S. government's looking for a way around it. They're trying to craft these resolutions for the United Nations that, first of all, demand the United Nations rubber stamp the claim that Assad gassed his own people, and that's a non-starter. They'll never get that through the Security Council. I'll tell you that right now. And the idea being that there's going to be monitors, and the first time there's a chemical weapon attack, they'll blame it on Assad and say, see, he couldn't be trusted, the war will be on. But again, knowing that the hired mercenaries have chemical weapons, the hired mercenaries have been using them, it's just another U.S. government fraud to get a war going. Okay? Now...
And...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I'm thankful for Putin getting involved. I don't want anybody, but, if he's getting involved in this, I thought, whatever happened with the deal with Snowden? I thought Snowden was over there in Putin's country. If
yeah,
Putin
he's still there.
He's still there. Why isn't Putin, getting Snowden to release anything he can on the U.S. and I just have one more.
It's already happening. They just released more documents showing that the NSA has been spying on commercial interests in Brazil, despite their claim that they were only spying on potential terrorists, which means everybody. Apparently, the NSA had penetrated and was spying on the French Foreign Ministry. And so, yeah, that information continues to come out. Apparently, Brazil is now having police protection around Glenn Greenwald because of threats to his life and safety.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And just one more thing. What is the Jesuit conspiracy?
I have no idea. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Scott, are you there? I guess not. All right. Well, phone lines are open now. I want to finish up to the top of the hour here with a little bit of an analysis, and this goes back to my video, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. Scott has come back. Scott, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, now I can hear you.
Mike?
Yeah, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mike, you were talking, and I think that's all right for you to stay on the Syria thing, and I think with the situation in the boat and that, the puppet strings that went high, and it's a way to delay this situation. But Mike, I think what the big picture we should still concentrate on is the collapse. Because 1 out of 6 Americans are now on food stamps. And
yes.
If you go to the biggest states, listen to this one, the biggest states that are drawing them is Mississippi, And Washington, D.C. is the biggest one that is on food stamps and enroll it right now. Washington, D.C. So with the situation, I think what they're doing is they're trying to get everybody's mind, which we shouldn't have it off on that war front. But the big thing, Michael, is I think that you should still hammer home on the economics, because I think that's what they want to do.
I was just about to do that.
They want to keep people mind on this situation with this, but yet we got the deteriorating of our economics over here, and I think that's when they collapse it, that is going to excel the war. So thank you, Mike, for taking my call, and I'll just listen to your comments.
All right. Well, first of all, nobody is intending to collapse the economic system of the United States of America. The problem is they can't stop it from happening, because the private central banking model inevitably, by design, creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, and over the generations the debt piles up and piles up and piles up until the system is hovering on the verge of collapse, and that's when they start the wars. That's what they did the last two times. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, we're on the doorstep of World War III here right now. Okay, now, I'm going to take one more phone call. When we come back from this next Phyllis Schlafly news break, I'm going to go into what you ought to be realizing about why there is this push for Syria when Syria is on the other side of the globe and have not actually attacked the United States of America. Why are they investing so much in getting this going? Meanwhile, Mike in Texas. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, it's very short. Won't occupy too much time. I just noticed RBN listed my Congressman Ralph Hall as saying he's listening to his petitioners, so that's very good. I'm surprised. Haven't seen that much from Ralph Hall, and so I called his office. I know his major staff member over there because I speak over the last 12 years to him all the time, and I've talked to Ralph off and on. And so we just called in to say, yeah, we're calling our congressman and objecting to the Syria situation as well as the Federal Reserve, bring home the troops and get them out of other countries and get us independent.
You know, it's, yes, you have to keep, thank you for doing that, and everybody still needs to go on calling the House and Senate and the White House. We've got those numbers on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and just call them up and say point blank, we know you're lying about this. We don't support this. We are not in favor of this at all. Stop lying to us. We are not that stupid. Just be that direct. Don't threaten, or you'll have the Secret Service all over your gluteus maximus here. Now then, thank you for the call, Mike. We're going to let you go. We're coming up on a break here. When we come back, I'm going to spend a little bit of time. What is going on? Why are they still pushing this hard for war in Syria? A little tiny place over on the other side of the globe has not attacked the United States of America. Everything that's going on in Syria is internal to their borders, and the United States does not have a legal justification for intervening in other sovereign nations, especially without NATO and United Nations support. Why are they investing so much to get this thing going? And the answer may surprise you. All right, so we're going to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials, and when we come back, I'm going to lay out why they're betting the entire farm on this one war. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and before we get into the economic motive behind this push for war on Syria, I was noticing on the corporate media, Kerry was sitting in that Senate hearing, and he's out there saying, no, America isn't pressuring for this war, really. We're not trying to push for war. Really, it's the threat of Assad's chemical weapons that we should all be thinking about. So they're on the defensive. They're already having to back off and deny that the U.S. government very clearly wants this war, which we know. There's no question about it. Now, if you have not seen it, it is, again, reprised to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and probably you already have because YouTube is admitting to at least 300,000 views on the video made of All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And that ties in very much with what's going on with Syria, because we keep hearing over and over again from Obama's supporters that there has to be an attack on Syria to preserve the president's credibility. Now, that is a very nonsensical excuse to start a war, especially for a president who has no credibility, because he campaigned for office on a promise to end the wars and bring our kids home. Mr. Nobel Peace Prize here. And by the way, I think Putin deserves that Peace Prize a heck of a lot more than Obama does at this point. until you realize how credibility actually influences the back-channel economic discussions with other nations. Okay? Now, you remember how the Federal Reserve System issues all of the public currency as a loan at interest. The private owners of the Federal Reserve, because it's no more federal than Federal Express, it's just a name they took to make it look like they're part of the government, and they aren't. They see themselves as the government. In fact, we have Alan Greenspan on video saying the Federal Reserve answers to no government authority. They are above the law. So anyway, the private owners of the Federal Reserve, they get a piece of the action of all commerce involving the U.S. dollar because of that accruing interest. This is why every nation with a private central bank is drowning in debt, because by design, this scam creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. I hope you're with me so far. There will be a quiz next period. So what the Federal Reserve did to the American people to enslave them to hopelessly unpayable debt, the post-World War II Bretton Woods Agreement did to the entire world, where everybody agreed to use the U.S. dollar for trade and for international banking. It all has to go through the dollar. Where are they getting those dollars? They have to borrow them from the Federal Reserve. And that means the Federal Reserve gets a piece of the action of all global commerce involving the U.S. dollar because of accruing interest. It's like the mafia going around demanding a piece of the action from every business inside their territory. Got to give us a piece of the action. We're going to send our enforcers out. In the case of the United States of America, the enforcers are the U.S. military. And the problem we have seen over the last couple of years, because the dollar's value is being inflated away, because it's seen as very unreliable, it's being manipulated, and other nations are simply tired of paying a piece of the action to the United States to use their ink and paper, that a lot of nations have moved away from the dollar. So the only way the mafia, the Federal Reserve, can continue to collect their piece of the action is to send out their enforcers, the U.S. military, to slap down those nations who dare defy the mafia, the Federal Reserve, demands for their piece of the action. War is being made against nations that refuse to use the dollar or tangle themselves up with the global banking system. And a little note, at this time, Syria does not owe any money to the International Monetary Fund. They don't owe any money to the World Bank. They refuse to borrow from these central banks. So that's the implied threat. That's what they have to keep credible. The United States will declare war on any countries that dare sell their natural resources for currencies other than the dollar, or trade with other nations with currencies other than the dollar. And the United States demonstrated this in Iraq. In 2002, Saddam Hussein obtained United Nations permission to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. 1 year later, the United States invades under this excuse of nuclear weapons. They lynch Saddam and they put Iraq's oil back on the world market, but only for U.S. dollars, and the Iraq economy is tied in with the U.S. dollar again. Then Gaddafi set up a new state-controlled central bank in Libya with a value-based currency, the gold dinar. So the United States invades Libya, kills Gaddafi, destroyed the state central bank and the gold dinar, imposed a private central bank on the Libyan people before the fighting was even over, and Libya's oil is for sale, but again, only for U.S. dollars. Even with these clear demonstrations of what happens to nations that refuse the Federal Reserve, to turn over a piece of the action for all commerce, many nations have moved away from the dollar. China now has currency exchange deals with 8 nations that do not go through the U.S. dollar as an intermediary. The BRICS nations just funded their own BRICS-controlled central bank to facilitate trade and investment without using the U.S. dollar. Dropping the dollar as the global trade and reserve currency was even on the agenda of the recent G20, but driven off the media screens by the impending attack on Syria. So here's the real deal. When Obama's supporters talk about maintaining the president's credibility with an attack on Syria, what they really mean is maintaining the credibility of the U.S. threat to invade and destroy any nation that refuses to pay the Federal Reserve's piece of the action. That's what this is all about. If the president cannot get his war with Syria going, then that threat to invade if you drop the dollar becomes meaningless, and there will be a flood of nations dropping the U.S. dollar, and the party will be over for Wall Street and the mafia, the Federal Reserve. And that is why they are pushing as hard as they can for war with Syria, even as the world objects, even as the United Nations says no, NATO says no. Everybody on this planet knows the story about Assad and gas is no more real than the story about Saddam and nuclear weapons. This whole thing about maintaining the credibility of the president is proving the U.S. can and will continue to invade and conquer upstart nations that refuse to use U.S. dollars borrowed at interest. That's what's going on. If they don't get the war in Syria, the party is definitely going to be over. That's why they're pushing this hard. And again, despite all this talk on the American corporate media and coming out of Congress and the White House and everything, the rest of the world is saying, come on, you don't have a case. Even members of Congress who saw the classified briefing on Syria says it's a well-presented set of allegations with no proof whatsoever. Story from the American Conservative. What's the evidence behind the case for war? And it says this entire argument about moving forward into Syria to prevent Assad from using chemical weapons again is based on this claim that Assad used chemical weapons before, and that claim has not been backed up. It's not credible. Every investigation shows it's being done by the hired mercenaries. Now, Obama is already preparing to lose in Congress. In fact, Congress, rather than embarrass the president and open up their members to the wrath of the voters next year, they're already talking about just delaying the vote, and the White House is already saying, I, on my own authority, have a right to attack Syria, and in point of fact, he does not. This is an article out of therealnews.com saying that under the War Powers Act, the only way the president can go to war without Congress is if the United States is attacked in a manner that does not give Congress time to convene and consider their action. Which means even an attack on a U.S. warship might not qualify. Of course, this government doesn't follow the rules. Rules, well, that's for you to follow. Keep you in your place, keep you useful. But I have a message to all of our serving military out there. Knowing that President Obama does not have a legal authority to attack Syria under domestic law or international law, and does not have the sanction of the United Nations or NATO, then under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, serving American military have a duty and a moral obligation to refuse orders they know to be unlawful. Because the excuse, I was only following orders, didn't work in World War II, in the aftermath. If you're serving military and you are committing war crimes, you will be punished for it. And you can't just say, I did it because Obama told me to. We'll be right back with... Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're just now getting word that the United Nations closed-door session on Syria that was scheduled for 4 p.m. today has just been canceled, no reason given. And I think the reason is very clear. They understand the United States is pushing for war and nobody else wants it. And there's not much point in going in there and thrashing around and embarrassing everybody. All righty, we're going to go to the phones here. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael, and let me say what I'm going to say, and I'll get off quick. All right. Since I've been 5 years old, I gave allegiance to the flag and to this country. Mm-hmm. I'm 68 years old, and I'll still do so. But what gets me the most is our president is just starting to look like Barney Fife, and Putin is looking like John Wayne. And this, I know it's a communist country, but it's a shame that, of course, everything we buy is from the communist country anyways. But please, please do not get Barney the bullet.
Okay, well, you need to understand something. The new Russian republics aren't communist in the sense that the USSR was. Any more than like Italy's considered by some to be a communist country. It's not.
I have one more thing to say, Michael.
Sure.
Please, everybody, if you can, donate some money to RBN because it's a truthful station, and it's great to have it on the airwaves, and it makes me proud to be an American, to have the honor and the grace to hear that we can still do that openly without being cut off. Thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. And for those of you who do want to donate to RBN, you just go over to their website, republicbroadcasting.org, and there are two ways to donate. You can hit that donate button that's there, or you can, and this is a good idea, go over to the Republic Trading Group and buy some physical silver and physical gold to put in your little emergency stash kit to get through the transition times when this government collapses, and a proceed from every sale from Republic Trading Group goes to fund the operations of Republic Broadcasting. And again, we don't get any big checks from advertisers like Monsanto or General Electric or any of those big companies that are out there selling products of dubious efficacy and quality. We don't get donations from shadowy non-governmental organizations with hidden secret agendas. We are entirely supported by you, the listener. We are your radio network. And I thank you for those of you who did donate and have donated. We do really appreciate it. Every little penny counts. So thanks again for all of that. We're going to switch over to Cody in Utah. Aloha, Cody. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I actually called in just because I had just seen that Russia has canceled that UN Security Council meeting, but you had already touched on that.
I didn't realize Russia canceled it.
Yeah, Russia had called for the cancellation. It was supposed to happen at 4 o'clock. I had just seen it on RT, and I figured I had to let you know about it. But I had seen today also online that even with all of this going on, Russia is still continuing to send arms to Syria and said that they will keep doing it. You know, I thought this was going to be a real peaceful resolution just for Assad to hand over the chemical weapons, and things seem to fizzle out. But, you know, the war hawks, they want their war, and I think they're going to get it any way that they can.
You're exactly right there, and Russia is continuing to send weapons and supplies into Syria because they understand that the United States is still pushing to go for this attack, regardless of what happens to the chemical weapons. The chemical weapons are just the public window dressing about why the war is happening, just like Saddam's nuclear weapons were the public window dressing for why the war has to happen. And Russia has stated repeatedly that their response to a U.S. attack on Syria and or Iran will be to pour weapons and supplies into those countries, turn them into the new Vietnam, and grind the United States down to collapse in a long war of attrition. Russia has the resources to do it. Their economy is booming. They have one of the biggest trade surpluses in the world, in contrast with the United States of America, which has one of the worst trade deficits in the world. Nobody wants to buy our product. Go ahead.
Finish. You can finish your thought.
No, well, basically, Russia can do it. If Russia carries out their promise to turn Syria and Iran into the new Vietnam, the U.S. is going to lose. And that will force them to resort to their nuclear weapons, and that's really why this is so dangerous. Okay.
The rebels possibly attacking Israel. How is that going to play out then with Russia? What's going to happen if all of that sparks off?
Well, again, this whole situation could spin completely out of control. Like I said, Israel could just start launching rockets and bombers into Syria, just waiting for Assad to strike back. The important thing is that unlike the previous world wars, where the public was pretty much bamboozled as to what was really going on behind the scenes, certainly the majority of Americans and the rest of the world understand this is all just being cooked up out of thin air by these private central bankers who just want a war because it plunges the world back into debt to the private central bankers for another 50 to 100 years. And we've talked about this little three-part scam that they keep doing over and over and over again. As soon as these private central bankers get a license to counterfeit and start loaning money into circulation, debt builds up until the people choose not to borrow anymore. And at that point, rather than have the pyramid collapse, that's when the Keynesian economists come in and say, oh, government must borrow more on behalf of the people and without their permission to keep the pyramid going. Then when you reach the point where the people don't want to borrow anymore and the government can't borrow anymore, that's when these wars get started, because wars force people and nations to borrow even more to fight the war, and after the war is over to borrow even more to rebuild from it. And when it's all over, ordinary people like you and I, we've got pretty much kind of what we had before, but the graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're all back on hook to the private bankers for another 50 to 100 years. War is the bankers' richest harvest, and we know that's what they're trying to do.
Yes, sir. Okay, well, thank you, Michael. I'll let somebody else get on.
All right, we're going to switch over to James in El Paso. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, first of all, thank you for helping keep me and I'm sure many other people sane these many years to hear somebody.
What makes you think I'm sane?
Well, who knows if you're sane, but I credit you with helping.
Yeah, you know, they couldn't lock me up, but if I was already in, I'd probably have trouble getting out.
Interesting. Hey, I read a post this morning, and this idea even occurred to me, and I thought maybe you want to speak to it. That there's some people saying that, look, this may be Obama playing the situation brilliantly. Maybe he doesn't really want to go to war. Maybe all he really wanted was to get the weapons out of Syria, and look, that's what he's gotten.
Well, I've seen those posts going around there, but frankly, Obama's own behavior and statements are inconsistent with that. He had plenty of opportunities to back off this war agenda. Putin and Assad gave him a golden, exit hatch just yesterday, and Obama didn't take it. So, again, there's a lot of garbage that's being poured out there on the Internet and certainly on the corporate media trying to keep the issue confused, trying to obfuscate the fact that this is all being driven by money and banking. Because that is what they're really afraid that people are going to clue on to. They want you arguing about the cause for the war. They don't want you going back and looking at how absurd the official story about Assad gassing his own people really was on the face of it.
Yeah, getting to that, the absurd official story. The silver lining here is that it's stimulating a lot of discussion, a lot of people actually doing something, saying things that they didn't say, 12 years ago, or 10 years ago with Iraq. I just hope this rebounds to where a lot of people can make the conclusion that, maybe 9/11's worth a second look as well. Oh, well, a lot of people are doing that because tomorrow's the anniversary, of course, and we've been talking about that a lot. There are going to be all kinds of marches about 9/11. You've got the Rethink 9/11 posters are all over the place. We had one of their volunteers on the show call in yesterday, and I'm even wearing my Architects and Engineers 9/11 shirt here on BAM User today. That I got from the poster contest. So yeah, people are rethinking 9/11, and the polls are showing that the majority of Americans do not believe the official story about 9/11. The polls are showing more and more Americans are willing to listen to alternative views, not just of 9/11, but all of history. We got to take a break for phone calls, for commercials rather. We'll be back with more phone calls after these. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and again, the closed-door meeting at the United Nations that was scheduled for 4 o'clock has been canceled. We heard from the caller that it was Russia. I'm hearing from other sources that it was a unanimous decision. And I'm also hearing that the issue was the U.S. demand that, as a precondition, the United Nations agree that Assad did gas his own people. And as I said earlier in the show, that was a non-starter because they haven't made the case. In the United Nations, I think, and this is more that backlash from the realization that the NSA has been spying on the United Nations, the United Nations does not want what remains of its reputation used to bolster what is clearly a lie by the United States government, and so that all fell apart. Meanwhile, Syria has announced on Russian TV they are ready to turn over all their chemical weapons, and they will sign the Chemical Weapons Convention. And that is an important point here, because all this screaming about chemical weapons and breaches of international law was completely bogus. Because until Syria signs the Chemical Weapon Convention, if they use any of the chemical weapons that are in that convention, it's not a breach of international law because Syria has not said, we will not use them in a treaty. But now Syria will sign the Conventional Weapons Convention, and this is going to be a repeat of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because I went over and I looked at the Chemical Weapons Convention, and I noticed that Israel signed it but never ratified it. And you need to understand something about all these treaties where they go out and they'll have a big thing about the heads of states signing a treaty, huzzah, huzzah. But the reality is that after a head of state signs a treaty, it is still not binding until that nation's legislative body ratifies it and votes it through as the law of the land. And so Israel can say they've signed the convention, the Chemical Weapons Convention, but they never ratified it. They are not bound by it. Same thing with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran has signed it. It's playing by the rules. The United States has signed it. Not playing by the rules. Israel never signed it. They have nuclear weapons. They have nuclear technology. They were caught trying to sell clandestine nuclear warheads to the government of South Africa, which is the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. So they're still pushing forward on this whole situation. We got a whole bunch of callers. Alex in Florida.
Yes, Michael, I have 3 comments, and then I'm going to hang up and listen to you. There's a lady calling that was saying that Russia supplies Syria with all their arms. I wonder why Putin would want to be on the side of Syria. Well, no duh. I think that we supply Al-Qaeda with their weaponry that's going up against, one of the armies is going up against Syria. Isn't that correct?
That's absolutely right. The U.S. has been caught covertly supplying weapons and arms. Now they're overtly supplying weapons and arms for this invasion of Syria. And, Russia is going to be supplying Syria the same way they were supplying North Vietnam. And look how well that turned out.
That's right. Also, I heard a couple of callers, I think yesterday or the day before, stating that we should take our money out of the stock market, which I would love to do, but the government will kill you on taxes if you do that.
If you're in a 401k or an IRA, yes, absolutely, there'll be a penalty and all kinds of tax thing. But I know, I have to be very, very careful here because, believe it or not, there's actually a law in this country that you cannot call for people to pull their money out of the bank. Because if it triggers a run on the bank, they will come after you. We're supposed to all of the banks and question them.
I already did.
Okay.
I already did.
But there's talk. We were talking about this with Karen Tostado the other day, that on the day the United States attacks Syria, it might be prudent to yank all your money out of the bank and take it home, just in case everybody else is trying to do the same.
So my final question is, now that it looks like we will not go into Syria, do you still think our economy will collapse here in the next...
The economy is collapsing, and I didn't say... the economy is already collapsing, and I didn't say the United States is not going to go into Syria. They've hit a pothole, but they're still trying to find some way to get this attack going in order to maintain the credibility of the threat that any nation on earth that doesn't accept the U.S. dollar for global trade, any nation that doesn't accept private central banking, will be attacked and destroyed by the United States of America. This whole policy of dollarification of the world, restoring Bretton Woods, restoring the petrodollar, it's all coming down to Syria. And if the U.S. doesn't get their invasion of Syria, you're going to see a flood of nations start to dump the dollar all over the globe, and the party will be over. Okay? All right, we're going to switch over to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I must say I'm both relieved and disappointed that Russia bailed out Obama. And the reason
they didn't
why,
bail him out.
They
didn't bail him out. They put a roadblock in his way.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, he can declare victory, saying we rid these people full of.
I don't care if he can declare victory all he wants. If it means an end to the war, I'll live with that. And Russia did give him a graceful exit, but it doesn't look like he's going to take it.
Well, my thing is this, Mike. I think that the thing that is really the real threat to world peace here is the imperial presidency and the lawlessness of the U.S. Government. And
I agree.
I think that what we have right now is this perfect storm that's coming up between the web, Obama's over a period of time here with the NDAA and then him using the IRS to target his political enemies. He's pissed off so many people, and he's had to lie about the NSA over a period of weeks, continual lies that each new story they have to lie about again. But right now we've got so many people energized and calling, and you know better than I the numbers on the calls, these congressmen and so on, that I would have liked to see this come to a head, because I think it never is going to be better. And I would like to see him get defeated. If he's going to make a move, he makes a move, and then we'll see what happens, because this has got to end. And right now is as good as any time to do it.
A lot of people are saying exactly the same thing. I mean, the official U.S. economic forecast is that the recovery, as if we actually had one, will take at least another 30 years. So for people in my age bracket, what they're saying is, by supporting the United States government, it means you will spend the rest of your life in complete abject poverty, and I'm not all that happy about that, especially considering the very impolite way the government has been treating me over the last 20 years. So a lot of people are saying exactly the same thing. What do we get by supporting the U.S. government? We get more of what we've got now. Constant surveillance, constant spying, constant taking our money for all kinds of made-up crises, and unending war on the rest of the globe, and I've had enough. And, they're talking about bringing back the draft. They're going to draft women into combat roles. I mean, I think what we're starting to see is the flashing up of anger in the entire American population, because everywhere I go, here, running errands, supermarket, everything, everybody I talk to, they're furious. They're not just acknowledging the government is lying, they're angry about it, because they're sick and tired of being made fools of by this government over and over and over again.
Said, Mike, your old precept that, the best way to, end a dictatorship is force them to act like one. Well, if we had gone through and this vote had been defeated, and even people, Mike, who have been like some of my family who've been disparaging me as a little extreme, conspiracy person and all that, they've come over.
Yes.
And it's just this time is right, and nothing would show who controls this country more if we voted this down or it passed with 98% people disapproving, or voted it down and then Obama goes and does it anyways. Then we know indeed it's proof for everybody who wants to see.
Well, I think the damage is already done in terms of the credibility of the U.S. government and the corporate media with the American people. The damage is done. They're not going to get the trust of the American people back anytime soon. I'm seeing a headline now where apparently now President Obama is officially requesting Congress delay the vote on war on Syria to give diplomacy more time, or to basically set us all up for that big false flag attack that they will use to say, oh, we're going to war because Syria attacked us with a Death Star. Assad is a Death Star, and so forth. All right, Peter, we got to let you go. We're going to take a break for commercials. We got more people calling, and yes, we're going to talk about other things on this show besides Syria. And I'm going to skip forward to some of that stuff because there's an interesting development regarding the Arctic ice cap that in this new age of a skeptical American people, we need to call attention to. We will be right back. Welcome back to the show. Back to the phones here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome back. What's on your mind today?
Mike, this is probably the first time that I ever called you twice in your hour. And, brother, I need to let you listen because I'm a humble man right now. Mike, tonight when you have time to sit down, I know you got so much stuff traveling through your mind like me. You're a human computer like me. You take time to sit down tonight, Mike, and go inside Syria. What I mean by that is go on YouTube and punch in the ruins of Syria. Mike, I almost am crying when I see the videos, which I ask all the rangers, if you got a computer, to go on YouTube and see Aleppo or whatever, the city.
Aleppo.
Like, when you see the pictures, the buildings are destroyed. The tops are like fighter jets have already hit.
This covert attempt at an overthrow has just absolutely demolished the place. And you, the American taxpayer, you, the American taxpayer, are being forced to pay for all of this. You, the American taxpayers, were forced to pay for Iraqi prisoners to be tortured to death to find weapons of mass destruction that don't exist. You, the American taxpayer, are being forced to pay for systems to spy on you. You, the American taxpayer, are being forced to pay for war crimes. And at some point, I think the American taxpayer is going to get fed up.
Mike, I know, but I just want you to post, but if you go and see the damage, I know I called a while back, there's nobody there, Mike. They have left. It is a 3-year war. When you see the devastation of this on YouTube, of the buildings like it's, oh man, it's just terrible. I just think it's a big, you're right, it's a big scam to get in because they know with the collapse, and just get into Iran, but when you stop and sit down, and I challenge everybody that's called in, that's got a computer, sit down and look at the ruins of Syria, and it will stagger you and put you in shock. thank you, Mike, for letting me call in the second time, and keep up the good work.
I'll do my best as long as I can. Again, that was the whole point of that video I did for Claire Rivero's In Times of War. Is I just went out and I had this wonderful resource. They gave me permission to use all of these images, and we didn't focus on any one war. We pulled images from the Civil War, the Boer War, both world wars, Korea, Vietnam, all over the place to show war is just a terrible, terrible thing. But the money junkies are perfectly happy to start one because they can make money off of it. And that's what really this is all about. We're going to go to Chris in Washington. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm looking at these unemployment numbers, and it seems like they're all being juiced, and I guess that's why we're heading to totally destroyed our economy with the shenanigans of Wall Street, and they've basically declared war on us, so it's trying to distract the public and get them supposedly focused on some other part of the world. But
well, you see, the idea of having a war is, as they're resetting the economy, they've got the war to blame it on. Yes, you're hungry, but there's a war on. Yes, you're starving and homeless, but there's a war on. We've got to fight the war. And if they don't get the war and the economy collapses, which it's in the process of doing right now, when it all falls apart, we, the American people, are going to stand up and we are going to point the finger of blame where it deserves to go. Wall Street and Washington, D.C. They're not going to have the Nazis or the Japs or the Syrians or the Egyptians or the Iranians or the Russians or the commies or whoever to point the finger and say, this is why your life is so hard right now. No, we're going to say, our life is hard right now because we have this Ponzi scheme private central bank, the very same sort of banking system we fought a revolution to be free of, and we've been enslaved back to that same system for 100 years, and even worse, we're using America's military might to force this same banking system on the rest of the world. And that it's sick. It is just psychotic.
Well, the numbers don't make sense, because how can you... 500,000 people dropped out of the labor force in 1 month. And
well, they're rigging the numbers. They're rigging them. You know, there's nothing that this government is saying that you should take at face value. It's all driven by politics and trying to look good. We know the real jobless rate in this country is running somewhere between 30 and 40%. They get that 6 or 7% through all kinds of statistical correction and so forth and so on. We know that less than 50% of Americans have a full-time job right now. We're way past the hardships of the Depression of the 1930s. And the government is lying about the numbers. I mean, the Treasury Department is reporting a continued monthly deficit in government spending, but they're claiming the total U.S. government debt has not increased for the last 3 months. Obviously, they're lying.
Yeah, they can't lie about the withholding, the lack of withholding of the money, the revenue that's coming in from that, because that can't be duped or whatever. But from Zero Hedge reports, there's a record 90.5 million out of the labor force. And if we dropped another 15 million unemployed from the labor force, you would have zero unemployment, because those U6 numbers are not reported. They're considered disinterested or vanished or whatever. So how do you deal with 20 or 30 million or 90 million people walking around, and what's keeping them captivated from being upset? I guess I don't understand.
Well, they are upset. I mean, my wife and I deal with them, every week here with these food programs that we volunteer for. And they are very angry and upset, but they're still trying to cling to the belief that somehow this is all going to work out, and they don't realize it isn't. It is not going to work out this time, and a new world war isn't going to save this country, because it's gone way too far down. There simply isn't enough money to pay off all this artificially created debt. And it's all going to come crashing down. And what we need to be on guard on is we talk about the blueprint for the new America, and we better be making those plans right now, is that we do not allow anybody to come in and say, well, we'll just start up the private central bank system again, and there'll be all kinds of ink and paper for you to play with. No, thank you. Our elected government will issue the ink and paper on our own behalf and run it for the benefit. The public currency is a public utility, and anybody who comes in and says, oh, no, private central banking will work, you put that person on a rail, you give them a good coat of tar and feathers, and you run them right out of town.
Yeah, well, they've destroyed the Postal Service. They've made the Postal Service pay out 75 years in advance for pensions that don't even exist. And it's supposed to be a pay-as-you-go and based on the amount of employees you had, not what you think is going to be out there 75 years. So as a result, they've closed 45% of mail processing plants, reduced hours by 75%. And this is something that's in the Constitution.
I've just noticed in the last couple of months the delay for getting mail to and from the mainland here in Hawaii has virtually doubled. There are some things are taking, as long as a month to get out here now.
Yeah. Some of the mailers, big mailers, have left the system because it's costing more in lost revenue than it's saved by lowering costs.
Okay.
And trucking costs, you have to transport hundreds of extra miles to sort mail in the facilities that are still open. And as the fuel
costs start going up, the whole system is hovering on the edge of collapse, and that's why they're desperate to get these wars going. They absolutely are. If you want to fix this country, if you want to turn it around and still save this nation, your first step has to be shutting down that central bank, like Andrew Jackson did.
Yeah.
Start issuing, government-issued currency, as the Constitution said the President is supposed to do and the Treasury is supposed to do, like Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy tried to do. The common enemy of all mankind, leading to war after war after war, are those private central banks issuing the public currencies alone at interest. All of these problems track right back to them and their little Ponzi scheme, piece of the action, mafia system of finance.
Well, how do you think the establishment is going to react? Are they going to turn it into a Stasi state when they realize the jig is up? And
we're already there. We've got more surveillance on the American people than the Stasi could ever dream of.
Yeah,
so we're already there. The problem is we, the American people, know it, and we're getting angry. And when 300 million Americans stand up and say it's over, it will be over. Okay, because I know the federal government is buying guns and bullets for all their various federal agencies, but we all know how unenthusiastic government workers are about the jobs they're supposed to be doing. Do you really see these people risking their lives, manning the barricades to defend their bosses from an enraged American mob? I don't see that happening. They're going to run like heck. We'll pick up the guns and sell them, saying, never fired, only dropped once. We got to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and commercials. We'll be back with some comments about global warming. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I know we've got callers on the line, and we're going to get back to them and get back to this whole Syrian situation. But the very obvious, blatant lie that Assad gassed his own people, gassed women and children right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors on the very day they arrived, was so bogus, and coming hard on the heels of the lies about Saddam's nuclear weapons. As that earlier caller said, Americans are now awake. Even the most die-hard, in denial, I think I'm a patriot because I believe what the government is going to tell me, is now all of a sudden realizing, oh man, have we been fed a truckload of USDA choice bovine excrement. And they are looking at other things they have been told, looking for signs of fraud and deception. Obviously, tomorrow's the anniversary of 9/11. Majority of Americans don't believe the official government story. More Americans are now willing to go and look at the alternative view. And the word is definitely getting out there. And, of course, an issue that I have been on for a great many years now is the issue of human-caused global warming. Now, we just ended the summer of 2013. And way, way back when Al Gore was out there screaming about man, bear, pig, and the rest of it, we had all these environmental experts who were all getting all this money to just get out there about human-caused global warming, and they were predicting that by 2013, the Arctic would be completely ice-free during summer. Did not happen. In fact, this summer's ice cover in the Arctic was 60% larger than it was this time last year. It's growing. It's not vanishing. It's not disappearing. The polar bears aren't drowning. They lied to you. They lied to you to trick you out of your money for carbon taxes, to buy carbon credits. They lied to you to trick you out of your obedience to a global environmental authority that was going to tell you how you had to reduce your standard of living to save the earth from the evil carbon dioxide. They even went so far as to declare carbon dioxide a pollutant. It isn't a pollutant. It is essential for the cycle of life here on Earth. As carbon dioxide increases, plants grow faster, taller, produce more food. When you look at the medieval and Roman warming periods, they were times of incredible abundance. And people didn't have to scrabble trying to find something to eat because it was just all growing around them outside the door of their house. And they'd go out and grab something for breakfast and they'd say, I think I'll think about art and science and architecture. And so the reality is this summer has proven that all of these dire warnings about a warming world were absolute, complete nonsense. They lied to you, and it was intentional. And for those poor individuals who are still walking around saying, oh, there could never be such a thing as a wide-ranging government conspiracy, well, we got one. Staked out on the ground, naked for you to study and learn from. Because this conspiracy to defraud you of money for carbon taxes and carbon credits to get you to buy products that were more expensive and less effective than what you had before was all based on a complete fraud. Remember the ClimateGate scandal? When emails and actual computer code were leaked out of the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, which documented how they were doctoring the figures to get their little hockey stick to scare you all into going along with their little carbon credit agenda. Now, when Al Gore set up his carbon trading scheme, he was being aided by Ken Lay. Shortly before, Ken Lay either passed away or faked his death and skedaddled before he could be thrown in jail over the Enron scandal. And that was the goal, to do to the entire planet Earth with carbon dioxide what Enron had done to California with electricity. And we're always seeing the carbon Nazis out there, oh, it's warmer, it's warmer. It may be colder where you are, but trust us, the world is warming, the world is warming. And this summer's Arctic ice cap proved they absolutely full of bovine excrement. It was all a fraud. And so as you look with your now awake eyes, the eyes of wisdom, that this government is lying to you about everything, you can add human-caused global warming to the list. It didn't happen. Remember, 10 years ago, snow will be a thing of the past, and we've had several record-setting winters in a row, and we're going to get another one. This winter that's coming in is just going to slam things. We may be on the verge of a new little ice age. And it's not driven by human activity, it's driven by solar activity. Solar activity is down. It's a new Maunder minimum. And it's been established that the decline in solar activity is what triggered the little ice age in Europe and America. And we're going into it. These climatologists don't really know what's going on. They just know what they were paid to try and support. And they were caught rigging the data, literally writing in the computer code, past this year, start adding temperatures to drive the chart up. It was that obvious to anybody who can read computer code. The fake was in there. It was all a lie. This government rules you through lies, fraud, and deception. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. The Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons. And on Saddam's nuclear weapons. And now Assad's gas attack. This government rules and controls you through lies. And now you know that. And your friends know that. And it is prudent to, first of all, presume that anything coming out of the U.S. government and the corporate media is a complete fiction designed to manipulate you, to manufacture your consent for a new policy, a new war, a new tax. It's all lies, fraud, and deception. And I do not consent to be ruled with lies, fraud, and deception. Go back to your Declaration of Independence. Governments derive their just power from the consent of the governed. I do not consent to be lied to. Read your Constitution. There is nothing in there that authorizes the government to propagandize you. In fact, for a great many years of this nation's history, it was illegal for the U.S. government to propagandize American people inside the U.S. borders. Now they've rescinded that law. They're openly proclaiming, yeah, we're lying to you, but trust us, the lies are for your own good. And you know that too is a lie, just by looking around this country, looking at all the hungry and homeless that are out there. No money for the Storm Sandy victims, but plenty of money for another war in some other part of the world. All right, we're going to start taking phone calls here. Again, Don in Ohio. Aloha, Don. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon. I just wanted to make the point that we should start an effort to get Obama's Peace Prize taken away from him and give it to Putin. Wouldn't that really fry the Democrats?
Well, I absolutely agree, but because Obama did get it, along with Al Gore and a lot of other, well, Henry Kissinger, the Nobel Peace Prize is pretty much discredited. I don't think any sane, moral person would even want to be considered for the Nobel Peace Prize, considering the people who've already been given it. But you need to understand these big prizes are given to legitimize the very best of liars and warmongers. That's part of this whole scam. Oh, we have this expert on the Mideast, and they've got all these plaques and awards and citations, so you should listen to them. And don't pay attention to that independent media and those bloggers, because they don't get the big gold plaques to hang on the wall. So they can't know anything at all. They're not recognized authorities.
Am I correct? Oh, sorry.
No, it's part of the costuming that they decorate their paid propagandists with all these awards and degrees and diplomas and whatever to convince you that you should listen to them and not pay attention to anybody else.
Am I wrong in thinking that Obama got nominated 2 weeks after the nominating process was already over? I
recall that it sort of came and went really, really fast, and when he got his Nobel Peace Prize, everybody was just saying, this guy hasn't done anything yet. Why is he getting the Nobel Peace Prize? In theory, that's something you should do after you have demonstrated a commitment to world peace, not as you're first entering an office from which you're going to lay waste to half the planet to serve the private bankers. It made a joke out of the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm sure Alfred Nobel would be appalled by what's going on here. We got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with more phone calls after these words from listeners. Hello, America. Welcome back to the show. A couple of stories I want to catch up on. A listener just sent it in. Apparently, the city of Denver, Colorado, got hit with a major hailstorm. Now, I realize it's September. We're getting into autumn and winter, but apparently the hail was several feet deep. People were trapped in their homes by it. They had to get the skip loaders out there to dig out. So much for human-caused global warming. And another video I just put up there involves the progress on a lawsuit. Apparently there's a group of Canadians who have filed a lawsuit against the Canadian government to restore the issuance of money to the Canadian government to shut down their private central bank. We know that Hungary just got rid of their private central bank, went back to government-issued currency. I can't wait to see what excuse the United States is going to come up with to have to invade Hungary and Canada. Because that's what this is all about. We're going to go back to the phones here. Frank in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Mike. Thank you so much for taking my phone call. I remember last year during the campaign, the presidential campaign, how the talking heads in the media kept on saying Ron Paul's foreign policy was scary. I mean, Wolf Blitzer, Charles Krauthammer, Billy Crystal, the list went on, that his foreign policy was scary and bad for America. You know what, Mike? Today, 90% of Americans agree with Ron Paul's foreign policy. Non-interventionism and these foreign entanglements, let's focus on the American issues and keep it for American interests, not for this foreign interests or global interests. So Americans are turning around. And I'd love to see somebody put together a video of all the talking heads in the major media bashing Ron Paul over his foreign policy, and let's see how they say it today when they say that Ron Paul is absolutely correct. Keep out of these foreign entanglements. It's not good for this country and our time in history.
It's never been good for this country, but it's good for that private central bank. And the reason the Federal Reserve, as well as Israel, worked so hard to keep Ron Paul out of the race in 2008 and 2012 was that he, as president, would not have been willing to invade other countries for dropping their use of the dollar. And that was why they were absolutely united against him. And again, these wars are fought for the benefit of the private central bankers, maintaining Bretton Woods and the petrodollar deals across the globe. They are not good for the United States of America. They're certainly not good for the people of the invaded countries. It's all about propping up this little Bretton Woods Ponzi piece of the action scheme on the whole world. You're not allowed to do business unless you go through the dollar, and all dollars are issued as loans at interest. That's at the heart of all that we are seeing right now.
Mike, excellent point. I'd like to bring up something real quick about all wars are bankers' wars, and just to add another little piece of history to it. Back during 1914, when Pancho Villa was in office, he took over, he sided with the government of Mexico, and then he started his own area in northern Mexico. He had printed his own private fiat currency that was equal to the gold. And right after he'd done that, there was a Mexican war we had with him. We invaded Mexico to chase this guy down, destroying his fiat currency. And if you just read a little bit more into it, you can see right after the Federal Reserve was started in 1913, the war with Mexico began, I believe it was 1916, but there was no way the Federal Reserve private central bank was going to allow a fiat currency right across their border to exist. And that's the true reason I believe, and I believe it, that we had to take out Ponce Villa, because he did have an interest-free fiat currency that was used on labor, wasn't used on done from a private central bank. So this is another bit of history, I think. And as you expand all wars of bankers' wars, and as you add to it, you can have enough to write a book on it, I believe.
Yes.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for taking my phone call.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Joe in, I think it's Delaware. I used to have a list of the state abbreviations here, but Joe, you're on the air. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call, Mike. And as you probably already know, on Sunday, the Truth Seeker on the RT network did a segment on 9/11, and I mean, he built up to it, the 9/11. He set precedent. He talked about Northwoods. He talked about the Gladio scandal in Europe back in the 80s. You know, he showed that there is a precedent for this, for the American military performing terrorist acts to manipulate elections and the populace. And then he went into the 9/11, you know, that this was done to sway the opinions of the population into invading the Middle East. Now, Monday morning, Putin comes out with this offer of, you know, Syria's chemical weapons being under international control, which, you know, it looks like the U.S. is going to go along with it. And, you know, what I think happened was that segment Sunday was a non-too-subtle threat to the U.S., and if they move forward with war preparations, that Russia can probably produce, you know, hard proof that 9/11 was a false flag event, and they would do it. And at the same time, Putin gave the U.S., being the diplomat, the statesman that he is, you know, he gave them a way of backing down and still stay safe.
But the U.S. isn't taking it. Yeah, I agree with you. You know, Putin did come up with a deal that allowed the United States to retire from this push for war gracefully, and the U.S. is not taking it. They're trying to find some way to game it, to get around it. And as far as 9/11 is concerned, we're seeing all over the world more and more, even corporate media in other countries starting to look at 9/11. And the proof that it was a false flag is already out there. It's not like there's some big, dark secret waiting to be revealed. We have George Bush sitting in that school in Florida reading about pet goats, the Secret Service just letting them sit there, even though in theory, according to the official story, there's an unknown number of planes flying over the eastern half of the United States of America, crashing into buildings. The president's presence at the school was in the media 3 days ahead of time, and there was an airport only 4 miles away. Nobody is going to gamble the life of the president that there wasn't an airplane taking off from that airport right then and there. But they just let him sit there. The dog did not bark. They knew the president wasn't a target that day, and the only way they could know that is they already knew what the targets were going to be. We have the evidence of thermite recovered from the wreckage of the World Trade Towers. We have photographs of very obvious cutter charges, demolition charges on the ruins, the load-bearing members of those buildings. We have the way Building 7 just came right down into its footprint, looking just like a controlled demolition. We have... the list just goes on. And, of course, what is really most damning and easiest for people to understand is the BBC announcing that Building 7 had collapsed 26 minutes before it actually happened. That tells you they were following a script, and whoever had their finger on the detonator for Building 7 somehow got off schedule. Maybe they didn't have everybody out of the building yet. They hadn't set enough fires to make it look convincing, but somebody got off the script on that one. And so the proof that this was all a complete fraud is out there, and now we have an American public who is ready to look at that evidence objectively and decide for themselves if 9/11 was just another government lie like Saddam's nuclear weapons and the anthrax attacks and torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin and all the rest of that stuff.
You know, I mean, what you said about the BBC is true, is accurate, but even before that, at 2005, Aaron Brown of CNN, the anchor at the time, he announced that World Trade Center 7 had collapsed. He did it even before CNN did it.
So there are actually two major news organizations that announced this before it actually happened. Mm-hmm. Now, I would submit that there is an alternative scenario that may have taken place. Maybe someone on the inside was trying to send a message to the people on the outside that, look, this is fake. This, by what they call telegraphing, this information before it happened, someone was trying to tell the population that this was phony.
I disagree because when you mount an operation like that, the people who are inside the loop controlling it, you already know they're going to go along with this whole thing. And I think it was just a goof. It was a simple goof, like losing Flight 93 was supposed to crash into Building 7. That was a goof. They had to cover up for it by claiming fire brought down that building. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Joe, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Mike. Hey, I remembered when Mark Twain was interviewed, I was able to ask him what he thought would be the most effective way to counter the government corruption in high places, especially as it relates to the fabrication of war scenarios. And so we have to follow through on JFK's plan to dismantle the national security apparatus. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, seems like that was when I first learned about Andrew Carrington Hitchcock in his book, The Synagogue of Satan, where he documents the Israeli security agencies that had control of the airports and the communication systems. And
well, John F. Kennedy, and maybe it's because of that building. I mean, John F. Kennedy grew up as the son of a bootlegger. That's where the Kennedy family fortune came from during Prohibition. And he was a wild kid, in his youth. We all know about his sexual exploits and everything. They literally sent him off to the Pacific to get him out of town because of all the scandals that were piling up, and inadvertently put him in position to be the hero of PT 109. But apparently John F. Kennedy, when he actually got into that White House, it changed him. And all of a sudden he realized it wasn't just a country club game anymore. He was the president, and he started really trying to do the job correctly. I think that was also the downfall of Vincent Foster, because he was part of that whole Clinton-Rose law firm scamming thing going on in Arkansas, and all of a sudden he was in the actual White House, and I think maybe he had a crisis of conscience. So John F. Kennedy, he angered a lot of people. He issued Executive Order 11110, which issued government-issued non-interest-bearing currency, about $4.5 billion worth. He set his brother Robert Kennedy going after organized crime, even though organized crime had actually helped him in his election. John F. Kennedy was absolutely adamant that Israel not be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. They were trying to get him all the way back then. He took away the oil depletion allowance for the Texas oil billionaires that was just reaping them billions and billions of taxpayer dollars for no reason at all. And, of course, following the Bay of Pigs, when Kennedy realized how the CIA had lied to him and tried to manipulate him into this invasion, he set about saying he was going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 splinters and cast them to the wind. So Kennedy, there were a lot of people who wanted Kennedy dead. And like I said, just like there's never one reason for a war, there's never one reason for an assassination. And all the people who wanted Kennedy out of the way just sort of got together and said, all right, yeah, we all agree it's time for this guy to go, and how are we going to do it? And yes, Israel was very much in there.
Well, thank you for that, Mike. That's what we got to keep pounding away. And I wish someday that people in the Republic audience in our own local areas, counties can organize and do what they do in Switzerland, direct democracy, where we have control of the purse, and
it's technologically possible. Fred, I'm going to let you go here, and I'm going to finish up a comment here. The Constitution and the current structure of our government was created at a time when horse was still the primary means of communication across the country. When we talk about the blueprint for the new America, it is certainly within the reach of modern technology to have a reliable, honest, transparent, verifiable system of direct democratic participation by the people. And our new government basically would be a caretaker. They'd be janitors, keep the roads repaired, keep the bridges up, keep the public utilities working. But the major policy decisions of the United States can and should be set by direct democratic vote of the people. Should we go to war? We have to have 330 million people say yes. Should we be spending billions and billions of America's taxpayer dollars propping up Israel? That should be put to a direct vote of the American people. Should we be spending trillions and trillions propping up Wall Street's failed Ponzi scheme frauds? That should be put to a direct vote to the people. And I'm absolutely in agreement that direct participatory democracy is going to be the model of the future. We're going to switch over to Catherine in Canada. Aloha, Catherine. What's going on?
Hey, how's it going, Mike?
Well, we're on the edge of a war, and we're trying to stop it. Other than that, nice day here in Hawaii.
Oh, I hear you. One thing I just wanted to mention, because I don't think people are talking about some of the behind-the-scenes things enough, is the Ambassador Robert Ford and how he was such a protege of John Negroponte. And when we look back through history to the School of the Americas and what happened in Central America and that whole really sordid fiasco, and here are these people that repeat over and over and over again, but they're not the huge names like Bush and Cheney, and I think we make a mistake of putting sometimes too much onus on these big names, and we forget about these people and these players that continue on and on and on.
Well, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Every administration, whether they be Democrat, Republican, or up here in Canada, Liberal, PC, New Democrat, whatever. I don't know. I just thought I'd like to mention that to you. And I'm concerned because they seem to want to put Robert Ford, what I've read is they want to send him off to Egypt, which we haven't heard hardly anything about lately.
Well, it's deteriorating over there. I think the reason that we're not hearing a lot about Egypt is that both sides in that counter-revolution, is what it appears to be, have all of a sudden discovered they share a common ground, which is opposing the United States invasion of Syria, and that's why the media is kind of like not paying any more attention to them, because they can't photograph protests either for or against the new government of Egypt without seeing a bunch of banners saying hands off Syria, and that's the reason why that's not happening.
I think you might be right there. That actually makes some sense.
Okay.
But I just wonder why they're not speaking about these sort of people. You hardly see anything except for some of the more obscure blogs that look into it. I know Global Research, I think, did a piece a little while ago about Ford, about Negroponte, about that whole thing, which we do see repeated over and over again.
Yeah, the career, the unelected
with 9/11, because I remember that morning.
The unelected career policymakers that Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateralists, all these little groups that are out there setting policy, and of course one of the most infamous is the Project for the New American Century, which was a neocon foreign policy organization that basically wrote this agenda for endless war against the Middle East. And they called for a new Pearl Harbor to move their plans along, and on 9/11, they definitely got it. Catherine, I'm going to let you go here. We're running out of time, and I got a few topics I got to hit before the end of the show. Speaking of 9/11, Ben Swan is out with his latest reality check. More Americans are rethinking 9/11. See, this is the moment that we are at. This is a watershed moment. Regardless of what happens in Syria, the utter shamelessness and blatancy of the official lie that just makes no sense at all. Americans are being forced to confront the fact that this government does lie to the American people about pretty much everything, and they are going back and they're rethinking 9/11. They're rethinking the war on terror. They're rethinking how we got into Vietnam. They're rethinking how we got into World War I and World War II. They're rethinking private central banking. They're rethinking the 16th Amendment. And they're getting very angry. And by the way, I did a little research the other night, and I went back and I read some detailed histories about the last days of the Soviet Union, and that was exactly the same thing going on. Because of this network of fax machines called the samizdat, the Soviet citizens were waking up to the fact that their government was lying to them about everything. Chernobyl, Afghanistan, everything. And when the people stopped believing in the legitimacy of the Soviet government fell. And now we are on the beginning of the American people starting to rethink the legitimacy of the federal government. And I think we're irrevocably on the path to a collapse by that government and a collapse of the private central bank, and send it all into the trash bin of history right alongside that other Cold War failure, the Soviet Union. And get ready to restart the system for the American people. And that is the most highest agenda of the blueprint for the new America. To rededicate the United States of America to the people of the United States of America. And not have it warped into a private money-making venture by the money junkies. And the vote riggers and the corruptors. And I really do think that is going to happen. And if they fail to get their war in Syria by hook or by crook, the statement I made earlier I think is going to apply. You're going to see a whole bunch of nations all of a sudden drop the dollar all at the same time, and that's going to be the end of the party on Wall Street. And we have to be ready to decide for ourselves what kind of a government and nation we will have in this land after the dust has settled. I'm going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm getting the usual emails. Oh, there was no plane at the Pentagon. The Apollo moon landings were fake. The HAARP is changing. The what? Chemtrails. They're thrashing around. The U.S. government understands they have lost the trust of the American people. We don't trust them, and the best reason not to trust the U.S. government is because they are the U.S. government, and they have this long history of just using a snowblower to fling the bovine poo at us. And they expect us to stand there and say, "Thank you, sir, may I have another?" No, I don't think so, not anymore. I'm looking at this video of what is being called the 2 million biker ride to Washington, D.C., and it's getting zero coverage in the corporate media. But basically, they are planning on being in Washington, D.C. tomorrow on the anniversary of 9/11 to basically stand up and tell the U.S. government, we know you're lying to us. And the video, they got a lot of people to show up. It looks like, you know, they're going into Sturgis. It's just bike after bike after bike and people on the overpasses waving at them. And I understand there are going to be big protests in New York at Ground Zero. And the message is going out. We, the American people, know you lied to us. And for those of you who are going to be calling your members of Congress or the White House, that's something to include. Along with "we oppose war in Syria," just say, we know you're lying to us. You've lied to us all along. You are not the legitimate government of this nation by virtue of the fact you lie to us. When government lies to you to get your money, to get your children for war, they break the contract with America because the Constitution does not allow the government to lie to you. The government breaks faith with you. It betrays that trust that they claim you should have. Remember, we even have a video of Obama saying, oh, you shouldn't challenge the official story of 9/11. And who was the other guy who was saying, you know, let us not tolerate strange conspiracy theories. They know we have been onto them all along. But it's just a bunch of those little tinfoil hat bloggers. They'll never amount to anything. We don't need to worry about them. And now the polls are showing the majority of Americans don't believe the official story of 9/11. And even more Americans are now open to being shown the evidence of lies and deception. The cutter charge scars on the load-bearing members. BBC and Fox announcing World Trade Center 7's collapse 26 minutes before it happened. The very nature of the collapse itself. No plane hit that building, a couple of fires in a couple of offices, and it just comes right down looking just like a controlled demolition. And we do have one tape that captures the sound of the initiating blast. And people are ready to look at that. And what that other caller was saying about, you know, all my friends and family who thought I was just kind of out of it, and now all of a sudden they're coming on. I'm going through the same thing myself. I am getting tons of emails and messages and people coming up to me and say, I really thought you were out of it, and you were right all along. I said, yes, and now we are right. We know the government is lying to us about everything. What are we, the people, going to do about it? I will not live under a government that lies to me about everything. That is not what America is supposed to be. Government is supposed to be the servant of the people. In a republic, it's the function of government to obey the orders of the people. We, the people, tell Congress what we want. Congress votes in the laws. The President follows those orders. He executes the will of the Congress. It's why it's called the executive branch. The President is not supposed to persuade us to go to war. He's not supposed to have anything to say about it. Only Congress can declare war. By the way, there's a motion that's already been introduced in the House to rescind the War Powers Act and go back to a situation in which only Congress can declare war. Because in this age of modern instantaneous global communication, the President doesn't need to have the authority to deploy the military to deal with a crisis before Congress can be informed about it, because Congress is on the other end of that phone call 24/7. I don't expect it'll get anywhere. But there are some voices in Congress saying this has gone about as far as it can go, and unless we start turning around and pulling back from this fascist dictatorship, they're going to lose it all. Because they know how the Soviet Union came down. They know throughout history, when government loses the trust and faith of the population, the government can't function any longer. People stop paying their taxes. People stop obeying the laws. People stop filling out the little paperwork. People stop doing what they're told to do. And it will be the end of the country. And I think we're close to the end now. I think we're very close. And that is why they are so desperate to get this war in Syria. They think it will save them. They really think, because it worked the last 2 times, that if they can get World War III going, that we, the American people, will forget all about the lies that we were told. They'll forget all about the looting of our wealth to prop up the failed Wall Street financial system. They'll forget all about the looting of our wealth to give to Israel. We'll forget all about this stuff, and we'll salute the flag and line it behind our government and throw our babies onto the designated enemy's bayonets, and it is not going to happen. Because in big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2, the American people were charmingly, innocently naive and very trusting of their government. The idea that the government would lie to them about things that were that important, like whether or not the Lusitania was actually carrying war material or not, and was therefore a legitimate target for the German Navy to sink. Our government lied to us about that. Our government lied to us about the assassination of John F. Kennedy. What a ridiculous idea that would be. Our government lied to us about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, or a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Or they lied to us about Pearl Harbor not actually being a surprise, but a response to Roosevelt's 8-step plan to provoke Japan into the attack. Next thing you're going to tell me Saddam didn't really have nuclear weapons. So these are very interesting historic times. I know that in decades to come there are going to be all kinds of history books being written about what is happening right now, today, this very moment. And I'm also very concerned that 50 years from now, future generations looking back will view the Stars and Stripes with the same loathing that our generation viewed the swastika. Because our government is behaving pretty much exactly the same way Nazi Germany did. Concentration camps, torture, spying on the people, wars of conquest started with lies, a scapegoated minority. Doesn't make any difference whether it's the Jews or the Muslims. It's the same mechanism all over again. Gleiwitz, Reichstag fire, 9/11. Same dirty tricks over and over again. But the difference is, today's human population is much better informed. They're awake to what is going on. The internet, the blogs, the independent media have fundamentally changed the flow of information in society, just as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to ordinary people and literacy exploded across Europe. And those power structures that could evolve to the new reality and adapt survived. And those power structures that couldn't adapt to the new reality of no longer being able to lie to their populations with impunity went extinct. Our government, the United States government, is trapped by the burden of hundreds and thousands of lies told to the American people that they have to keep propping up. Because the instant they admit that one was a lie, it all unravels. And the last vestige of desperate clinging to a belief that somehow this is all going to work out okay under this current government is going to evaporate. I think we are in the last months of the United States of America. And it's sad to see it happen. It's like watching a beloved relative wither away from a devastating illness and not being able to do anything about it. But Claire and I have spent the last 20 years trying to encourage and nudge this government back onto a path of responsibility to the American people. And so if this whole thing is about to implode, they did it to themselves, and I have no sympathy for them whatsoever. Meanwhile, end of the show, I hear the music. Keep up the pressure on Congress. Call the White House. Just say flat out, I know you're lying to me, and you are delegitimizing yourself with the lies. We'll be back here tomorrow. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. They need all the help they can get right now. And aloha, America.